Welcome to the Global Pulse, a short video series where our experts break down a trending topic in international business and why it matters to you.
The European Parliament last week adopted the Digital Services Act, which seeks to better regulate big tech. In other words, companies like Google, Amazon, and Facebook owner Meta. Within the Act are provisions targeting illegal products and content and measures that restrict targeting for advertising. The Act also seeks greater transparency of algorithms to enable better enforcement. It provides for punishments to ensure compliance. Of course, this is just the beginning of the process, which now moves to the European Council, where it will involve negotiations with the member states. Notwithstanding the overwhelming majority with which the Act passed in Parliament, the going will get tougher and intensive lobbying by tech companies is to be expected. So today I'll be talking about the provisions of the Digital Services Act that relate to targeting and data privacy. The Act seeks to prohibit targeting of minors and of all people based on deeply personal attributes such as sexuality, religious belief, and genetic information, and the like. Interestingly, a bill was also introduced in the US Congress last week, the Banning Surveillance Advertising Act. And this seeks to ban all forms of targeting based on personal information. The law would still permit targeting based on broad geographical location. Again, it's not clear what will eventually become of this bill, but it does seem that there is gathering momentum to update regulatory frameworks to better protect privacy. In this context, it's also worth mentioning China's personal data law, the Personal Information Protection Law, that went into effect late last year, but that's a whole another story. So in my opinion, it's extremely important and increasingly urgent to regulate privacy invading tech. Everything we have learned from recent well-publicized revelations when it comes to how tech firms make risk calculations when using personal information is quite alarming. Given advances in AI and machine learning, the technology for targeting has been improving at a dizzying pace. Regulation has been slow to catch up. This is both because that's in the nature of the legislative process and also because of the expertise of large tech companies in thwarting legislation. Europe has, of course, led the way when it comes to privacy, and there's much to like in the current draft bill. It focuses on the worst practices. This makes me at least somewhat hopeful that when negotiations occur at the Council with EU member states, the DSA will survive in at least some form. A blanket ban on targeting was voted down by the Parliament, and that would have had a much lower probability of surviving the lobbying process. Stopping the worst excesses, such as targeting of minors, I think is a good start. There are several interesting ideas present in the Act. First, requiring that people be allowed the choice of refusing targeting without having to give up the service itself. Another is prohibiting the practice of deceptively hiding the choice to not consent to invasions of privacy using so-called dark patterns. There's increased liability for harmful content. And finally, there's the threat of large fines, up to 6% of global sales. The DSA would begin to set boundaries which can then be expanded in a measured and deliberate way. There's no way of knowing what, if anything, will become of the DSA and the Banning Digital Surveillance Act here in the United States. At the very least, it is interesting to see ideas being floated to tackle the very real problem of privacy invasion. The ideas will come under scrutiny for unintended consequences, as they should, and some will eventually make their way into laws. We are near the beginning of the process of tackling the excesses of what has come to be called surveillance capitalism, and I do think a lot hangs in the balance.